I thought I was just learning how to drive. I never expected those lessons to change the way I saw myself or the person sitting beside me. My name is Ethan Parker, and at 22 years old, I thought I had already figured out most things about becoming independent. I was a college student trying to balance classes, part-time work, and the pressure of planning my future. The one thing I still had not managed to do was get my driver's license. Living near campus had always made it easy to walk, use public transportation, or ask friends for rides, but I knew there would come a time when I needed to rely on myself. That was when my best friend, Jason Reynolds, suggested an idea. "My dad can help you practice," he said. "He has been driving for years, and he is really patient." I knew Jason's father, Michael Reynolds, from family gatherings and casual conversations over the years. He had always seemed like a calm and responsible person, someone who treated people with kindness and respect. Still, I expected the lessons to be simple. Learn the basics, practice parking, understand the rules, take the test. That was it. The first time I sat in the driver's seat with Michael beside me, I was more nervous than I wanted to admit. My hands felt tense on the steering wheel, and I worried about making mistakes. Michael noticed immediately. Instead of making me feel embarrassed, he simply smiled and said, "Everyone starts somewhere. The goal is not to be perfect on the first day. The goal is to keep learning." Those words stayed with me. The lesson was supposed to be about driving, but somehow Michael made it feel like it was about much more. He did not just explain how to control the car. He explained the importance of patience, awareness, and staying calm when things did not go according to plan. During those early lessons, I started noticing how different Michael was from what I expected. I had always thought of him only as Jason's father, someone older who had experience I did not have. But behind that role was a person with stories, challenges, and lessons he had learned throughout his life. Between turns around the neighborhood and practice sessions in empty parking lots, our conversations slowly became longer. He would ask about my goals, my classes, and what I wanted to do after graduation. It surprised me because most people asked questions without really listening to the answers. Michael actually listened. He remembered small details I mentioned days earlier. He encouraged me when I doubted myself. He reminded me that confidence came from practice, not from pretending to know everything. At first, I thought I simply respected him because he was helping me. I thought I appreciated his guidance because I needed it. But as the weeks passed, I started realizing these lessons were becoming something I looked forward to. Not because of the driving, because of the conversations. I did not know it yet, but those afternoons in the car were teaching me something much bigger than how to pass a driving test. They were teaching me how one person's patience and kindness could leave a lasting impact on another person's life. After a few more driving lessons with Michael Reynolds, I started realizing that the time we spent together had become something I genuinely valued. At first, I told myself it was only because he was helping me gain confidence behind the wheel. Learning something new can be stressful, and having someone patient beside me made the process easier. But slowly, I began noticing that the lessons were about more than driving. They became moments where I could talk openly, ask questions, and hear advice from someone who had experienced more of life than I had. Michael had a way of making simple conversations meaningful. During one lesson, we were practicing in a quiet neighborhood when I made a mistake while parking. I immediately felt frustrated with myself because I wanted to improve faster. Michael calmly told me, "You are focusing too much on the mistake and not enough on what you learned from it." I laughed because I realized he was right. He was not just talking about parking. He was talking about how I approach challenges in general. I had always been someone who worried about getting things right the first time. Hearing Michael explain that growth came from patience changed the way I looked at myself. Over time, our conversations expanded beyond driving. He asked about my goals after college and what kind of person I wanted to become. I told him about my worries, my uncertainty, and the pressure I felt to have everything planned out. Michael listened carefully and shared stories from his own younger years. He explained that most people do not have everything figured out, even when it looks like they do. That advice stayed with me because it made me feel less alone. What surprised me most was how comfortable I became around him. I had always respected Michael because he was Jason's father, but I started seeing him as a person with his own experiences, dreams, and lessons learned over time. He was not trying to impress me or tell me what to do. He simply shared what he had learned and allowed me to decide what mattered. One afternoon, after we finished practicing, we sat in the driveway for a few extra minutes before I went home. Michael asked me why I seemed so determined to get everything right. I thought about the question before answering. I told him that sometimes I felt like I was behind everyone else. I felt like other people already knew where they were going while I was still trying to figure things out. Michael smiled and said, "Everyone has moments when they feel that way. The important thing is not comparing your journey to someone else's." That conversation stayed in my mind for days. I realized that Michael was helping me become more confident, not just as a driver, but as a person. The strange thing was that I began looking forward to each lesson before it even happened. I looked forward to the conversations, the advice, and the feeling that someone believed I could become better. I still told myself it was only appreciation. I told myself I simply respected him because he had helped me. But deep down, I knew something about these moments felt different. I did not understand it yet, but the person teaching me how to move forward was slowly becoming someone whose presence meant more to me than I expected. The more time I spent with Michael Reynolds, the more I realized that our driving lessons had become a part of my weekly routine that I never wanted to miss. What started as a simple favor from my best friend had slowly turned into something I looked forward to. I still needed practice behind the wheel, but I found myself paying just as much attention to the conversations we had along the way. Michael had a way of turning ordinary moments into lessons about life. One afternoon, while we were driving through a quiet area near campus, he asked me why I always seemed surprised when someone believed in me. I smiled and told him I was not used to people noticing the effort I put into things. I had spent years trying to prove myself, thinking that asking for guidance meant I was falling behind. Michael listened and told me something I would remember for a long time. He said that accepting help was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign that a person understood the value of learning from others. Those words made me think about how I had viewed myself for years. I had always focused on what I lacked instead of recognizing how much I had already achieved. Michael encouraged me to see progress differently. He reminded me that confidence was not something people were simply born with. It was something they built through experience, patience, and small victories. As the weeks continued, I noticed changes in myself. I became calmer during lessons. I stopped worrying about every small mistake. I started trusting my own decisions more. But the biggest change was not related to driving. It was the way I approached conversations with Michael. I began sharing more about my life, my hopes, and the things I usually kept to myself. He never judged me or rushed to give answers. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions that helped me understand my own feelings. One evening, after another successful practice session, we stopped at a small coffee shop near the neighborhood where we usually drove. We sat outside and talked about the future. Michael told me about moments in his own life when he had felt uncertain and unsure of his direction. Hearing that made me realize that even people who seem confident have their own struggles and questions. I had always seen Michael as someone who had everything figured out, but that conversation showed me a different side of him. He was not perfect. He was simply someone who had learned from his experiences and wanted to share those lessons with others. On my way home that night, I thought about how much these lessons had changed. I had started this journey wanting to learn a practical skill, but I was gaining something much more valuable. I was learning how to believe in myself. Still, there was one thing I did not fully understand. I knew I respected Michael. I knew I appreciated everything he had done for me. But I also noticed that I felt unusually happy whenever I saw his name appear on my phone before a lesson. I found myself remembering small things he said and looking forward to our conversations more than the driving itself. I tried to explain it as simple gratitude. I told myself I was just thankful for someone who had helped me grow. But a quiet feeling inside me suggested there was something more complicated happening. And for the first time, I started wondering why someone who had only been teaching me how to drive had become someone I thought about long after the lessons ended. The moment I realized my feelings were becoming complicated was not during a dramatic event. It happened during an ordinary afternoon when I was sitting in the passenger seat beside Michael Reynolds, listening to him explain something as simple as staying calm while making decisions. That was when I noticed something I could no longer ignore. I was not only paying attention to his advice, I was paying attention to him. I started noticing the small things that made Michael different. The way he always remained patient when I was frustrated. The way he remembered details about my goals. The way he encouraged me without making me feel like I needed to become someone else. These things had always been there, but now I was seeing them differently. At first, I felt confused by my own thoughts. Michael was my best friend Jason's father. He was someone who had helped me become more confident and independent. I respected him and I was grateful for everything he had done. But I also knew that the feelings I was experiencing were no longer as simple as appreciation. I tried to convince myself that I was only inspired by him. Maybe I admired his confidence because I wanted to become more like him. Maybe I valued his guidance because I had needed someone like him at that point in my life. Those explanations made sense, but they did not completely explain why I looked forward to seeing him so much. I noticed myself becoming more thoughtful before our lessons. I would remember conversations we had days earlier. I would find myself smiling when I thought about a piece of advice he had given me. It was strange because nothing about our interactions had changed. Michael was still respectful and supportive. He still treated me as Jason's friend and someone he wanted to help. The change was happening inside me. One day, after finishing a driving session, Michael asked if everything was going well. He noticed I seemed quieter than usual. I quickly said that everything was fine, but he looked at me with the same understanding expression he always had. He told me that sometimes people carry thoughts they do not know how to express. He said that being honest with yourself was an important part of growing up. His words made me think about how often I avoided difficult emotions because I was afraid of what they meant. I realized that my confusion was not because Michael had done anything wrong. It was because I was trying to understand myself. I knew there were boundaries and responsibilities that mattered. I knew that respect was more important than simply following a feeling. But I also knew that pretending I felt nothing would not make those emotions disappear. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on my own life. I spent more time with Jason, worked on my classes, and reminded myself that my connection with Michael came from a place of trust and learning. Still, every time I thought about the future, I remembered the lessons he had taught me. Not just the driving lessons, but the lessons about patience, confidence, and understanding myself. The biggest surprise was realizing that the person who helped me become more independent had also made me look deeper into my own emotions. I did not know what would happen next, and I did not have all the answers. But I knew one thing. This was no longer just about learning how to drive. It was about learning how to handle feelings, choices, and the responsibility that came with understanding my own heart. After realizing my feelings for Michael Reynolds were becoming more complicated, I decided the best thing I could do was create some distance and focus on understanding myself. I knew emotions could be confusing, especially when they involved someone who had become important to me in an unexpected way. Michael had entered my life as someone who was simply helping me learn a new skill, but over time, he had become someone whose advice and kindness had a much deeper impact on me. The last thing I wanted was to let my feelings affect the trust and respect we had built. So I tried to return my attention to the original reason our connection began. I focused on my driving practice, my classes, and spending time with Jason. I reminded myself that Michael was my best friend's father, someone who had always treated me with patience and respect. Those facts mattered, and I wanted to honor them. For a while, I thought creating space would make everything feel simpler. But I quickly learned that avoiding my thoughts did not make them disappear. During our next few lessons, I noticed that I was more careful with my words. I worried that I might accidentally reveal something I was not ready to explain. Michael noticed the change almost immediately. He had always been good at reading people, and he asked if I was feeling stressed about anything. I told him I was just busy with school, which was partly true. But I also knew I was avoiding the real reason. Michael did not pressure me to explain. Instead, he simply reminded me that everyone goes through moments when they need time to understand themselves. That response showed me the kind of person he was. He respected my space without making me feel distant. He cared without expecting anything in return. That was one of the things I admired most about him. A few days later, I talked with Jason while we were studying together. I did not tell him everything I was thinking, but I asked him about his father. I wanted to understand Michael better from someone who had known him his entire life. Jason laughed and said that his dad had always been the person everyone went to for advice. He explained that Michael was patient with people because he remembered what it felt like to be uncertain when he was younger. Hearing that made me appreciate Michael even more. It also reminded me that the qualities I admired were not something created for me. They were simply part of who he was. That realization helped me see things more clearly. My feelings were real, but they did not have to control my actions. I could appreciate someone without rushing toward something I did not fully understand. I could be grateful for the positive influence he had on my life while still respecting the situation we were in. During our next driving lesson, I felt more comfortable. I stopped overthinking every conversation and focused on being present. Michael noticed that I seemed more relaxed and smiled when I successfully completed a difficult parking exercise. He told me I was becoming more confident. I realized then that the most important lesson Michael had given me was not about driving at all. He had taught me patience with myself. He had taught me that growth takes time. And maybe the biggest challenge I faced was not learning how to handle a car, but learning how to handle my own emotions with the same patience he had always shown me. The weeks that followed taught me that understanding my own feelings was only the beginning. The harder part was deciding what those feelings meant and how to handle them responsibly. I continued my driving lessons with Michael Reynolds, but something had changed. Not between us, but within me. I no longer felt confused every time we talked. Instead, I started seeing the situation with more clarity. Michael was someone who had made a positive difference in my life. He had encouraged me when I doubted myself. He had helped me become more confident. He had shown me that becoming independent was not about knowing everything, but about being willing to learn. One afternoon, after I successfully completed a difficult driving practice, Michael smiled and said he could tell how much I had improved. He reminded me that a few months earlier, I had been nervous about every decision behind the wheel. Now I trusted myself more. Hearing that made me realize how much had changed. I came into these lessons thinking I needed someone to teach me how to drive, but I was leaving with a better understanding of myself. Later that day, I sat with Jason at a local cafe near campus. We talked about school, future plans, and the changes that came with growing older. Jason mentioned how grateful he was that his father had helped me. He said Michael had always been someone who wanted to support people when they were trying to improve themselves. That conversation reminded me of something important. Michael's kindness was not something special because of my feelings. It was simply who he was. He was someone who cared about helping others. That realization helped me separate my emotions from the reality of the situation. I could appreciate the impact he had on my life without losing sight of the respect and boundaries that mattered. A few days later, during another lesson, Michael asked me about my plans after graduation. I told him I was still figuring things out. He nodded and said that was completely normal. He explained that many people spend years discovering what they truly want, and there was no reason to rush the process. His words felt familiar because they reminded me of everything he had taught me from the beginning. Patience, growth, confidence. Those lessons had become more valuable than any driving skill. As I prepared for my final driving test, I realized that the person sitting beside me had changed the way I approached challenges. Michael never tried to make decisions for me. He never told me who I should become. He simply encouraged me to trust myself. That was why his influence mattered so much. He helped me find confidence that was already inside me. When I finally passed my driving test, Michael congratulated me with a proud smile. He told me that the most important thing was not the license itself, but the person I had become while working toward it. I thanked him for everything he had done. I meant every word. Looking back, I understood that this journey was never just about learning to drive. It was about learning how to recognize the people who inspire us, how to appreciate the lessons they bring into our lives, and how to make thoughtful choices when emotions become complicated. Michael had entered my life as someone who taught me a practical skill, but he left a much deeper impression. He taught me that growing up was not about having every answer. It was about learning from every experience and becoming someone who could move forward with confidence. After passing my driving test, I thought the chapter with Michael Reynolds would naturally come to an end. I assumed the lessons would stop, our schedules would become busy again, and life would slowly return to the way it was before. But I quickly realized that the impact of those months was not something that disappeared when the lessons were finished. The biggest change was not that I knew how to drive. The biggest change was that I had become someone who trusted himself more. I started noticing how many things I approached differently. I was more willing to try new challenges. I stopped expecting myself to be perfect immediately. I became more patient when things did not go according to plan. Those changes were connected to the conversations Michael and I had during every practice session. A few weeks after my test, I saw Michael and Jason at a family event. It was a normal afternoon with casual conversations, food, and everyone catching up. Seeing Michael outside the usual setting of driving lessons made me realize how much my perspective had changed. He was still the same person, but I understood his influence on my life more clearly. He was someone who had helped me during a time when I needed confidence and direction. During the event, Michael asked how college was going. I told him that things felt different lately. I was making more decisions on my own and feeling more comfortable with uncertainty. He smiled and said that was a sign of growth. He reminded me that independence was not about never needing anyone. It was about knowing when to learn from others and when to trust yourself. That idea stayed with me because it explained everything I had experienced. For a long time, I thought needing guidance meant I was behind. Michael helped me understand that everyone learns from someone at different points in life. The important thing was appreciating those lessons and continuing to move forward. Later that evening, I talked with Jason while Michael was speaking with other family members. Jason mentioned how much his father enjoyed helping people. He said Michael had always been the person who encouraged others to believe in themselves. Hearing that made me smile because it confirmed something I had already started to understand. The qualities I admired in Michael were not connected to one specific moment. They were part of who he had always been. That realization helped me find peace with my own emotions. I did not need to ignore the positive impact someone had made on my life, but I also did not need to let those feelings create expectations that were unfair to anyone involved. I could be grateful. I could respect the lessons I learned. I could appreciate someone's kindness without forgetting the importance of making thoughtful choices. As time passed, I began focusing more on my own goals. I spent more time with friends, worked harder in my classes, and started planning my future with more confidence. But whenever I faced a difficult decision, I remembered Michael's advice. Stay calm, be patient, learn from every experience. Looking back, I realized that some people enter our lives for reasons we do not immediately understand. Sometimes they give us exactly what we need at a certain moment, not by changing who we are, but by helping us see what was already inside us. Michael never gave me a simple answer for my future. He gave me something much more valuable. He helped me believe that I was capable of finding my own way. As time moved forward, I started to understand that some experiences do not end when the moment passes. They continue shaping the way we think, the choices we make, and the people we become. My journey with Michael Reynolds was one of those experiences. What began as a simple arrangement to help me learn how to drive became one of the most meaningful periods of my college years. Not because of the skill I gained, but because of the perspective I developed along the way. I used to believe that becoming independent meant handling everything alone. I thought asking for advice meant I was not prepared enough. I thought needing support was something I should overcome as quickly as possible. But Michael helped me see independence differently. He showed me that strong people are not those who never need help. Strong people are those who are willing to learn, listen, and continue growing. That lesson stayed with me long after our driving sessions ended. During my final year of college, I found myself facing new challenges. Decisions about my future became more serious, and I often felt the same uncertainty I had felt before learning to drive. The difference was that I now approached those moments with a calmer mindset. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I remembered the conversations I had with Michael. I remembered how he always encouraged me to focus on progress instead of perfection. One afternoon, I visited Jason and his family again. It had been several months since my driving lessons ended, and life had become much busier for everyone. When I saw Michael, we talked about how much had changed since the first day I sat in his car feeling nervous about every decision. I told him that I still remembered his advice and that it had helped me in ways I never expected. Michael smiled and said he was happy to hear that, but he reminded me that I was the one who had done the work. He said he had only offered guidance, but I was the person who chose to keep learning. That response was exactly what I had come to appreciate about him. He never wanted credit for someone else's growth. He simply wanted people to recognize their own ability. After that conversation, I realized something important about the feelings I once struggled to understand. What mattered most was not holding onto a complicated emotion. What mattered was recognizing the positive influence someone had on my life and carrying that lesson forward. Michael had been an important person during a chapter when I needed confidence and direction. The respect I had for him became a reminder of the qualities I wanted to develop in myself. Patience, kindness, understanding. As I continued building my own future, I found myself applying those lessons in my relationships with other people. I became more willing to listen. I became more supportive of friends who were facing challenges. I became someone who understood that a small moment of encouragement could make a bigger difference than we realize. Looking back, I think the most valuable lessons in life are often unexpected. We meet people during ordinary moments, and sometimes those people leave an impact that lasts far beyond the original reason we met them. Michael entered my life as someone helping me learn a practical skill. But what I truly learned was how to trust myself, respect others, and appreciate the people who help us become better versions of ourselves. That was the lesson I carried with me, and it was one I would never forget.